Hey, thanks for clicking. I'm Grace, and this is where I share any opinions I may have about any of the literature I may read. And today, we're going to be talking about The Pumpkin Spice Cafe by Laurie Gilmore. This book was originally published in August of 2023. This is another one of those books where I would give kind of two separate reading level ratings as far as like reading comprehension. Yeah, probably like ages 12 to 14. It's not a difficult read. But as far as the content, I would not recommend this to anyone who isn't an adult. So 18 plus, really. This book is categorized into the genres of romance novel, mystery, erotic literature, and contemporary romance. If that gives you any more information on why I would recommend it, 18 plus minimum. So let's hop into a quick little summary. I am doing something a little different with this video than I've done with my past ones. So bear with me as I work out some of the issues. The main characters' names are Jeannie and Logan. I'm certain that there was a last name given, but my brain didn't retain that. And I listened to this twice. So it's not like I didn't listen to it. I listened to it. Anyway, Jeannie is our female main character. She moves to Dream Harbor, where her aunt used to own the Pumpkin Spice Cafe. Her aunt decided to retire kind of suddenly and essentially decided that Jeannie was the best person to take over the coffee shop. Jeannie had recently experienced kind of a traumatic event, and so she was eager to kind of move from where she was and get a little bit of a fresh start. So she accepted her aunt's offer. This is a romance novel, so as you can imagine, she moves, she's trying to get the coffee shop up and running. She meets our other main character, Logan, and immediately they are experiencing a connection between each other. Logan also recently experienced kind of a traumatic event for him and is reticent to start any sort of new relationship with the new girl in town. So he and Jeannie kind of like dance around this denial that they both have for their affection for each other. And then we see them slowly start to trust each other, and of course, the book ends when they end up together. I think it's important to start this analysis off with some information on my bias. For reasons as of yet unknown to myself, this character reminded me of someone from my past that I am not very fond of. And so that already set me off to a bad start with this book. Had Jeannie not given me such icky vibes at the start, might I have liked this book a little better? Maybe. And yet, we'll get into it. So the reason I'm bringing that up is I want to talk about the likability of the characters themselves. And I am going to be focusing in primarily on the two main characters, Jeannie and Logan. So, as I just shared, I found these characters fairly unlikable. I saw a lot of like toxic tendencies in their behavior that just rubbed me the wrong way. And so, as the book progressed, I liked them less and less. But both of them are very likable characters within the story. When Jeannie moves to town, she is the new girl, but she's friendly, she's cute, and she is getting along and kind of finding her place within the community. Now, because I have two conflicting feelings about the likability of these characters, they affect the story in really different ways. So for me, because I found the characters so personally unlikable, I had a really hard time caring about their plights or their journey through this story. But like I said, Jeannie being such a likable character in the story, she has like the normal amount of struggle that a person has when they're trying to integrate into a new community. But by and large, she's well received, she's making friends and connections and kind of finding stability in the community. Now, as far as Logan, Logan has been a staple in this community since he was a child. Everybody loves him, and even though he is kind of grumpy and standoffish through most of this book, everybody in town seems to kind of have a sort of a soft spot for him. Between the two of these characters, I found it really hard to relate to either of them. Like I said, there was just some really like toxic, icky behavior that I just didn't relate to either of them. Funnily enough, I think between the main characters, I think the person that I found myself relating to most would have been Logan, and that's only because this kind of small town community, they're very close knit. Everybody's kind of in everybody's business. And that to me was very reminiscent of my personal origin story, where I grew up in a very, very close-knit community to the degree that it was toxic in some of the same ways that I noticed in this book. I wanted to focus in a little bit on Jeannie and Logan's sort of motives throughout this book. Jeannie comes to town, she's the new girl, but we see her really seeking belonging among the townspeople. She is very much viewing Dream Harbor as kind of a fresh start, maybe, the first day at the rest of her life kind of feeling. And so it seems to be really important to her that she kind of finds her place. And then to kind of mirror that, we see Logan also seeking belonging, but in sort of different ways. He's also seeking acceptance and safety. Just before Jeannie arrived, there had been a different new girl in town, and she had fallen in love with Logan, and he had fallen in love with her. And then he felt so confident about the relationship that he decided to do a public proposal, and she was not receptive and ended up kind of just fleeing town after that. And so after the whole town kind of saw that awkward moment, heartbreaking, life-changing moment for Logan, he is really nervous about Jeannie's appearance and having any sort of affection for her, for fear that she's going to do the same thing. And unfortunately, that's about the most character development that we actually see. As Jeannie moves through the book, she does start to make connections. She starts to feel comfortable. She starts to feel really settled on Dream Harbor being her home for the time being. And then we see Logan struggling with his demons of he's kind of looking for any sign that Jeannie is going to leave town as soon as possible. And so he finds those clues where they really aren't there. He jumps to a bunch of conclusions. And then at the end of the book, of course, there's that moment where they reconnect and end up hooking up. It's not really, in my opinion, it's not really growth. They work through this scenario, but it feels very much like they both come out the other end of this interaction very much the same people, not having really grown or changed much as far as character development goes. Now, from a more technical type of standpoint, I would consider this book fairly well written. There weren't any grammatical errors. I felt like there weren't any sentences that felt clunky or out of place. The plot, as far as subplots or loose ends, there really wasn't anything wrong or out of place. Everything kind of flowed pretty smoothly. Everything, by the time you got to the end of the book, it made sense. It's an easy, fairly simplistic type of read. When you're jumping from one perspective to the other, you hear Jeannie's perspective, her kinds of thoughts and feelings, and then you hear Logan's, and we jump back and forth between the two as need be. in my personal opinion, the structure is kind of the only thing this book has going for it. As far as I was immensely irritated by the plot. This is very much giving Hallmark fall romance. And for what it's worth, if you're looking for an easy read, somewhat of a slow burn romance, some steamy scenes, and a happy ending, then this is your book. Yeah. As long as you have a high tolerance for toxic behavior. Honestly, I think I think my biggest takeaway from this novel in particular is that sometimes romance novels are written for straight people, and that's okay. They're just not for me. This book, it was only like 6.5, maybe 7 hours long, but it took me like a week to get through it. And that was while listening to it at like 3 times speed. This book felt so devoid of meaning that I could only handle it a few minutes at a time. It felt interminable. I thought this 7-hour book, listen to it at 3 times speed, is never going to end. As far as setting and how much the story relied on it, I would say that it's pretty particular. The plot relies pretty heavily on them being kind of overseen by this close-knit community, this small town vibes. Everybody's kind of involved, and there really isn't much that the two main characters have to themselves, because as soon as they're seen even like talking to each other or sitting next to each other at the town hall meeting, everybody's whispering about it. Everybody has an opinion. Everybody's trying to, nudge them one way or the other. There's very much this community involvement that is an integral part to the story. And it is very like fall based. There's a Halloween festival or something that happens where they end up like judging costumes. They go to like the kind of a farmer's market. It is very fall themed in this little town. Some of the themes that stood out to me: go to therapy. The overarching theme that I was picking up in this book was, you people need to go to therapy. And if you're new here, I am not saying that derogatorily. I think everyone should go to therapy at some point in their life. I think everyone needs therapy. And I think, semi-annual check-ins would benefit society as a whole. I do. So when I say go to therapy, I can see the misery that these people are living with, and I wish that they would just access healthcare, because this story would be so much more tolerable if they just went to therapy. Something else that really stood out to me that irritated me probably the most, there was a lot of male objectification. Like, most of Jeannie's thoughts about Logan are about how hunky he is, how sexy, like the sexy farmer thing is really working for her. Oh, he looks so good in flannel. Oh, it's that cute smile. It's the way that he brushes his hair out of his face. It's very physically motivated in a way that just felt icky to me. And, if it was just her viewing him this way, it might not have bothered me. But there's this book club that meets at the cafe, and it's kind of this group of some older women, and they read primarily smutty novels, which I don't have a problem with, right? Like, I'm a big fan of smutty novels. Who isn't? The way that they talk about reading the smutty novels just feels very icky and just generally made me uncomfortable. Not to like get up on my soapbox, but for how long have women been screaming about being objectified and how we don't want that? And yet we have books like this where every chapter we're seeing men and even our main character constantly be objectified in these really uncomfortable and icky ways. And it just really rubbed me the wrong way. Like I said, I'm a fan of steamy novels from time to time, but I couldn't even enjoy those like steamy scenes because I was so off put by the foundation of this relationship that we started from. I don't know, it just really icked me out, the whole thing. And like I mentioned earlier, I think I'm the wrong audience. I really do for this type of content. Also, okay, one point of defense for the Pumpkin Spice Cafe. I was reading, like when I was taking a break from the Pumpkin Spice Cafe, I was reading a different book that had some really interesting and complex intimacy that was so polar opposite. And so switching between those two stories, I think, was such a stark difference. I do want to say it again. I do think that I can see the purpose that this type of book serves, right? Like, Hallmark movies are as big as they are because they serve a purpose. And I think this book serves the same type of purpose. I am just absolutely the wrong audience. Had I not been planning to do a video on this book, I would not have finished it. Bearing in mind that I am the wrong audience, I suppose there is a certain aspect of coziness that you find in this book. She is running a coffee shop called the Pumpkin Spice Cafe. There's pumpkins everywhere. It's happening in fall. I feel like I can't remember her mentioning one single crisp leaf though. And I mean, what cozy fall book is a cozy fall book without mentioning crisp leaves? You know what I mean? And it also doesn't help that I was reading this book while I was walking out in my neighborhood, which is beautiful fall, crunchy leaves everywhere. Honestly, it should have helped because I was out walking in the fall autumnness and I was reading a fall autumn book, and it just, I'm telling you, I found it so icky. I could not enjoy it. I could not enjoy this book. As far as genres, I felt like this mostly fit into it. The mystery aspect of this book I found a little bit lacking. I mean, there was mystery. I just found it uncompelling. Like, when she first gets there, hearing these weird noises outside at night, and she decides to stay up and figure out what it is. It turns out to be a cat, kind of nothing burger. And then we see that there's still kind of small acts of vandalism happening throughout the cafe. The trash cans in the back are knocked over every day, or the flowers in the front, the little planter that they're in gets knocked over every day. And then towards the end, a window gets broken, but then nothing's stolen. It's just kind of these random little bits of vandalism that feel kind of silly to me. I don't know, they just kind of felt a little bit out of place. And then it ends up that it's one of her employees who's trying to get her to sell the cafe to him because he wanted to run it. Anyway, that gets resolved in a sort of a cute way, so I suppose it counts as mystery. It just wasn't that interesting to me. It's definitely a romance. There's definitely some very steamy scenes. She does go into great detail. As far as the steamy scenes, they were, like I said, technically well written. No complaints there. I've already expressed my thoughts and opinions about those. But anyway, I found a couple of kind of fun little questions. What do you think happens after the book ends? In my opinion, because it has a happy ending. My opinion, it's a happily ever after for a couple of years, and then either they get intensive therapy, which that's the best outcome we could hope for, but more than likely they divorce and go their separate ways. That's my opinion. And then the other question that I thought was interesting was, would this book make a good film? And I actually think it would make a better film than a book. And only because, so every once in a while, I like to watch Hallmark as kind of a fun activity. My husband and I enjoy watching shows together or TV together. And like, as we're going through, either of us will be like, pause. Okay, I think this is what's going to happen next. Or like, I think this is the bad guy. Or like, I think this person did this. We kind of like to like make predictions as we're going through, and then, you know, together we find out who was right. And so I enjoy Hallmark movies in that way, and I think that this could have been a fun experience in that way. As a book, I genuinely hated this book. And if it was an hour and a half instead of 6.5 or 7 hours, I would have liked that much better. So I think this is probably like the worst rating I've given a book. I've read so many books over the past couple of months, and there's two I can think of that I didn't enjoy, but it's because they were so good at what they were doing. Wayward is the one that I most recently reviewed. One that I haven't reviewed yet just because I haven't figured out how to talk about it yet. But it was so good that, like, I don't need to read it again. It was too good at what it did. It covered heavy topics so well and so good. Like, I would consider both of those books like a work of art, but also I don't want to go through that trauma again. This book, however, I just found bad. Like, for the type of reading that I enjoy, I just found this book bad. And I think that's all I got for you. So if you would maybe like, subscribe, I would love to hear your comments down below. Do you think you'll be reading this book? Is this your kind of book? And if it is your kind of book, please elaborate. Tell me more. Because I simply do not understand. Personally, I will be sticking with my romanticities. There was not a single magical creature in this book, and I'm sorry, it just doesn't compare. Anyway, you know what to do. I hope to see you around.